Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Patrick Jonsson. Patrick is the founder of DigiProCure, who provide a category management tool focused on streamlining the category management process. He has led many digital procurement transformations involving a wide array of systems, and he has witnessed firsthand the need for tools that adapt to each team's maturity and needs. So, hello, Patrick. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hello, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Now, I talked a little bit in the intro about the fact that you focus predominantly on processes, most specifically category management. But for people that don't know you, can you share a little bit more detail about your background and professional expertise?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm from a small town in Sweden called Karlstad, the Swedish woods. And all the way from my studies, I spent time in the UK when my study buddies went to become consultants and bankers. I went to Bedford Build Center in England and spent some time there to get to know a business from the very bottom. Then I went to Philadelphia during the financial crisis and came back to Europe, to Denmark. Never made it back to Sweden. And all in all, I spent about 15 years within procurement, the bulk of that digital procurement and working with e-sourcing, contract management, really end-to-end digital procurement processes. So that's a little bit on my professional background. The last 3 years, I've been working as a procurement consultant, and in June last year, I decided to go for this DigiProCure company. I thought it was the right time to attack this space.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that we had specifically connected around having this conversation is a white paper you've recently put out. And I think it's funny, anybody that happens to be listening in that works in procurement will instantly get this. But you talk about Stone Age procurement, right? There's always sort of this new and old tension in the field. So as we start moving into that and the positions and opinions you express in that paper, how do you define Stone Age procurement?
Yeah, thank you for that. So when I came out of the industry, I felt, that I had something that I wanted to share. And it actually took me quite a while to write that white paper in calendar time and to define it, because I really felt that, there are these two sides. You have the progressive companies like Maersk that have, a robot that creates e-auctions and that award and updates the product catalog. And you have those really progressive companies. And then you have kind of the rest of us, right? You don't have that much in between. And I would define Stone Age procurement as companies that on a maturity level from 1 to 4, where 1 being just purchasing product, and 2 being, touching on strategic sourcing and doing sourcing optimization projects. That we're on level 1 to 2, where we might have tried to work with category lifecycle management and dabbled a little bit with digital procurement, but not much. So that's kind of how I would define Stone Age procurement.
Well, the good thing about that, at least from my perspective, listening to you explain it, is that it's not like the vast majority of organizations are as progressive as Maersk. And I agree with you, they're an amazing organization, what they've achieved. There are very few companies that have done what they've done. So it's not your typical curve where you have a very few laggards and a very few super advanced companies and everybody else is sort of in the middle. It sounds like most of us are relatively early on in that maturity curve, despite truthfully how much effort we have made to adopt digital and improve our processes. Um, and yet you observe in the paper that many procurement organizations are currently in an adapt or die moment. And I think I agree, but I want to hear you talk about it a little bit more. What do you mean by this adapt or die moment?
Yes, I guess it's of course a provocative statement, right? It's the idea is to make a provocative statement.
Absolutely.
You could have said the same thing 10, 15 years ago, but I think it's more true today than any time before, that it is an adapt or die moment. You see, the amount of startups within the digital procurement space is just absolutely exploding. If you go to LinkedIn and look at podcasts for that matter, everything going on in the space is massive, and you have this low code no code platforms, and it's easier to configure and code, and many people can, you can create a startup, start a SaaS platform relatively easy, maybe compared to earlier. So there's a lot going on in the digital procurement space. You have all these books being written, and some companies are starting to jump on that and adapting it, our robot process automation or whatever it is they're starting with. So some companies are getting on the bandwagon and adapting it, and some are not. And they might not necessarily die tomorrow, the ones that are not, but they will potentially laggard compared to
Yeah.
the ones that are jumping on, right?
It's so interesting that you bring up the explosion of investment and innovation in procurement tech. This has been coming up in more and more of my conversations. So I agree with you. It's funny, we think about the adapt or die moment from a practitioner or a thought leader or consultant type of perspective, but clearly it's not just people in procurement that have noticed. Now, it may look slightly different to people outside, building these solutions and sort of looking in. Clearly, they see an opportunity. But however you put it, the general awareness around this adapt or die seems to be universal. Everyone seems to have noticed that we're in a very important moment right now. Do you also find that different types of awareness, but this recognition that we're in a really big moment is something that people share with you? Do you find this is a common bond in conversations that you have?
Yeah, I think there's is again, if you want to be a bit extreme, there's really two sides of that. There's the ones that realize it, and then you have the ones that definitely have not, right? That
Yeah.
you speak. Sometimes I speak to different stakeholders or potential customers, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, or we are firefighting. We have chaos in Shanghai and war in the Ukraine, and we're just buying product. We're just trying to make things work. And then you have others that realize, yes, we have that, and this is actually putting it even more on the agenda for us, that we need to be able to deal with this more smartly. We need to work more strategically. We need to automate our processes. But again, I think it's really kind of stone age or progressive, if I want to put it a
Yeah.
bit more extreme. So some are getting it, more people are getting it, but I think there's still the vast majority that that are probably not getting it. If yeah, that's my
Yeah.
experience. That it's more cost out, cost out. How can we get cost out?
Okay.
Cost out is so, it's always cost out, and then some are starting to talk about, okay, we actually need innovation. We need tools to innovation. We need carbon. We need to understand our carbon footprint. We need tools to that. But most of the time, it is how can we get cost out
Yeah.
still.
Now, when you think about the challenges being faced by this whole range or these two groups of organizations, what would you say are the most common pain points that sourcing organizations are trying to address and that truthfully they really need to solve for before they can either move to the next rung on that maturity, that evolutionary ladder, or before they can actually start to truly prosper as a team?
Yeah, yeah. I think you could put it into kind of three overall buckets, at least in my experience. And the first one would be uh, fragmented process and technology. You know that you need to create more productivity, automate, and integrate. That would be kind of one bucket of a pain point. The other one being this kind of operative short-term focus, where you need to look up and maybe have a bit more long-term strategic focus. You know, take one step back and think about how do you really create value. How does your procurement function really create value and work more strategically? And the third bucket would be kind of a fragmented procurement skill set. I think especially in relation to digital procurement and processes. I think those would be kind of the three overall pain point buckets that I see in my experience, and those are the ones that you would need to deal with in order to prosper, I think.
Well, and it's interesting because when I look at those, the fragmented technology, in some ways, the explosion of solutions is a little bit making that worse, right? Because the prevailing thought right now seems to be you either do a wide ranging platform or you do sort of a best of breed ecosystem. And if you're doing a best of breed ecosystem, you have to make sure that all of those spot solutions are integrated by either, an interface at the entry end or a data layer underneath, or potentially both. But if you get too distracted by all of these little spot solutions, you're actually trying to solve a problem, but unintentionally fragmenting it further.
Mm.
The procurement skill set, that's an interesting one for me too. And one of the things that, ironically, I hadn't thought about asking you in advance, but is sort of the obvious question, is there have been a lot of conversations about the role of category expertise and how that fits in in-house procurement talent. There are some companies, especially if they have very large procurement teams, that will, not for every category, but for a certain range of critical core categories, have in-house experts in fuel, in marketing, in certain types of commodities or materials. And then there are other procurement organizations that are either smaller or leaner, that are more process and philosophy focused, that will partner with external category experts and subject matter experts when they need that expertise. And then they just kind of run point on the process and working with the organization. What are your thoughts around, where category expertise needs to live from a procurement talent standpoint?
I my take on that is that I'm a huge believer of 80/20, right? That 20% of input or 20% of knowledge will create 80% of the value. And I think applying that, so if you have people that have dedicated time to tactical and strategic work, that will help to work more strategically, and that have an okay foundation education, and that can think strategically, then I think you can get really, really far. And over time, they will also, category managers will relatively quickly get to know their category. I think they just need to take the time to work
Mhm.
strategically. And at times, and in certain situations, yeah, you probably need the real specific knowledge. It really depends on the industry, if it's
Mm.
production or wholesale, I think. But I think more it's actually a matter of how you organize, how you look at your organization, making sure that you have people that work, that are defined roles towards tactical and strategic work. And I think that also ties into your first consideration there with regards to all these different solutions out there. I don't necessarily see that as a problem. What you need to think about is this solution, is it geared towards tactical work?
Ah.
Is it geared towards strategic or operational work? If it's geared towards operational work, then I would definitely look at how do I automate and integrate, because it should be well defined tasks that you can run that way. But if it's geared more towards tactical and strategic work, I would be less concerned about integration, more concerned about easy to use tools. To be honest, that's how I look at that.
I think that's an interesting way to divide up both the tech and the talent. Of course, it makes sense for that approach to be aligned between the two. Because I feel like, we I started kind of by talking about the tension that exists in procurement between sort of the old ways and what we're all aiming to move towards. There's always been this sense of, and I'll say right up front, you've said some provocative stuff. This will be my sort of provocative. This is my opinion. There's been a little bit of a sense of embarrassment, I think, on the part of procurement around tasks and even processes that we view as tactical. There's been sort of this sense of like, oh, that's very manual, that's very tactical, it's operational, and we're embarrassed that that's part of our scope of responsibility. And so we have a tendency to like, well, I'm going to, tuck that in a drawer when somebody comes by, or put something on top of it so no one sees it, when in fact, really embracing it and being purposeful about the way it's addressed, that's because those things do need to happen. Every function in the enterprise has tactical work that they need to do. And yes, the strategic work is the really exciting stuff. And it's what the CEO wants to talk to you about. And it's what the CFO wants to ask you about. But we do need to acknowledge the reality that both types of work do exist, and they both need to be done well if at the end of the day, procurement's results are going to meet expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I would even build on that and go further and say that, and let's continue the provocations here, right?
You're going to see my
So
provocation and raise me. Okay, I'm ready.
yeah. So strategic sourcing, uh, is it strategic or is it tactical?
Yeah. See, I agree with
So
you on this.
yeah. So I would say to work with strategically, that is, understanding the market dynamics, disruptors, vision, and making a SWOT analysis, and looking at Porter's five forces and working with category strategies. That's what I see as strategic. But strategic sourcing, I see it actually more as tactical. That you're executing on procurement optimization projects that's an outcome of a strategic process. So I think most of us do tactical work, and hey, it's actually that work that creates the value, right?
Yeah.
If you have the right strategy. So there's
No,
nothing. It's all good, right?
that's
Yeah.
funny. And I totally agree with you about that. I think strategic sourcing was strategic in its formulation. It was strategic in its definition, and certainly in some ways how you implement it. And that's not to say that no one focused on strategic sourcing is strategic, right? There are incredibly strategic people using sort of the spirit of the process. But if you're using your 5, 6, 7, 8 step sourcing process and
Mm.
checking things off as you go, that's a tactical process. Doesn't matter what you call it, right? And yet that is what delivers the results. So if we
Mm.
think practically, we've talked a lot about sort of vision and perspective and a little bit of philosophy. And I'm glad you're willing to come with me, Patrick, on being provocative, because I think that's important. Those are the ideas that drive change. But if we turn practical for a second, what types of enablers, right? At Art of Procurement, we like to talk about taking action. What
Mm.
types of practical enablers would you recommend that procurement teams embrace in order to start a paradigm shift within their team, in the team's mindset, in the team's approach, and something that once it takes root can then sort of radiate out through their work into the organization?
Yeah. I mean, there's various answers to this. There's the classic, find some quick wins and market them to the organization and so forth. But I would say you can look at it from different points of view. So one of them would be looking at your organization again, dividing it to this operative, tactical, and strategic roles that we talked about, because then you're earmarking products and time, roles and people and time towards strategic work, because otherwise, if you don't divide it, the operative work and the firefighting is always going to push out the tactical and strategic work. But if you're too strict with that division, then you might also create internal issues, because if you do it on too high level, you get touch point and process issues. So you need to do that at the right level. But that would be one of the first things, looking at the organization and dividing it into those three areas, different roles, I think. If you look at processes, here, I think there's lots to do here. And I would identify kind of the most heavy and value destructing processes that can easily be improved first. And the most problematic ones is typically in a larger organization, the ones that goes across silos. They would be typically they're good candidates for being right sized, deleted, killed or improved,
Mhm.
because you might not know, you might actually have three people doing some of the same things in three different silos. So looking at those processes and maybe considering and carefully considering establishing kind of process owners and cross-functional teams. But I would be careful, because there you could also get a lot of coffee discussions and a lot of process discussions.
Yeah.
So maybe start with one process, assign one process owner, and one cross-functional team, and have a high-level person follow that and see what value it creates and build from there. Not go overboard to
Yeah.
start with. And then the classic one, RPA, robot process
Yeah.
automation. Look at some classic operational tasks, and start to automate those. So those would be two, within organization and processes. And I think with it regards to people and skills, to create there, you should create some, because it's not only about skills, it's also about motivation. So get that's half of it, right? So getting executive support to run an e-auction live in front of 100 people that is going to be successful, and save 40% on the
Yeah.
screen, have somebody comment on it, and market it internally, right? Then you create a good spirit to work more with digital procurement or e-auctions, for example. And then hire team players, and I think with regards to training, tailor make it. Don't accept standard out of the box training from consultancies, because people that yeah, tailor make it. I think that's important. So that would be some practical
Yeah.
things. And I think, with regards to tools, start with user friendly ones. Half of the work is change management, but it also ties into having user friendly, intuitive tools. So think kind of iPhone or Facebook ish, right? It needs to be very simple to use, I think. And don't build a moon rocket. Go for yeah, but that's the classic.
Yeah.
You go for moon rockets and you have to solve everything. Everything has to be integrated. No, 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 no. Start small, right? And think Pareto, this 2080
Yeah.
rule. And practically, many organizations today still don't have the spend overview, right? It's a good place to start. They don't have, having a contract overview and maybe an overview of your category strategies. So build those overviews and do it simply. You don't need to start with contract creation. Just get the overview first, I guess. So those are some of the key, the things that I write about also in this white paper.
Yeah.
And then the last part, I think, is KPIs. You get what you measure. So start simple again. Start with number of e-sourcing events, number of e-auctions, or a gross margin measurement. Just start simply, and then go towards more holistic KPIs, slowly but surely, where you, based on activity-based costing, you divide fixed and variable costs if it's a wholesale situation, at least, and then you can start to draw insights on that. So those are some of kind of the practical enablers that I touch also in this white paper, and it's based on just my experience within wholesale, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there's a ton there. And two things that I jotted down that are of particular interest to me. One is this idea of value destructing processes. I think that's a really interesting idea because so often we think about, okay, we work through this process and what do we have at the end? Or, what does it create? Does it create what we expected? But the idea that a process could actually destruct value and that you could end up at the end of the process with less than you started with, I
Mhm.
think that's a compelling idea. That's something that people should be, as they review their processes, right, as they kind of start this journey towards being more mature. I think that's an excellent thing to be on the lookout for. And the other thing is this idea of, yes, looking at skills and knowledge and capabilities. I mean, I think how effective we are maybe is questionable, but we certainly know to be focusing on the talent leg of that three-legged stool, but remembering to include motivation.
Mm.
I've been a part of some of those sort of theatrical auctions like you described, where it's a legitimate event, but you're being strategic about it internally, and you're bringing the right people together, and you sort of set up like a war room kind of feel. I think those are the types of things that procurement has to remember. It's not just enough to do the work and deliver the results and be effective, that there are so many things going on in organizations today. We have to make sure people have the opportunity to see what we're able to do. And I think that's an excellent example of an opportunity to pull people in and show them, and then give them a feeling, right? Because there's
Mm.
an excitement, there's a little bit of nervous tension that comes with an auction, and things happen. And certainly it raises the stakes if you're bringing executives in to watch. So you have to be
Yeah, yeah,
ready.
I think those are some really good
Exactly.
perspectives. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just to continue that one
Yeah.
on processes, I have one example from a business that I worked in a few years ago. Just getting products into the product catalog, like practically getting information from a supplier and getting it into your product catalog. I remember we worked with a huge Excel document, huge amount of metadata, and it took ages just to get that information in. The supplier didn't know how to fill it in, and you had to go back and forth. And at the end of the day, you didn't need all that information for all products and all product categories. And it kind of annoyed the suppliers going back and forth. So it was quite of a heavy process. So that
Yeah.
would be an example of, almost actually value destructing. I think with regards to processes. So I think that's a really good point, that's something to look at. And you also mentioned doing this live e-auction event. A classic is that you do an assessment of which categories are suitable for e-auctions, right? You look at, okay, here's a competitive supplier base. I can specify products here, and it's commercially attractive to the suppliers. Yes, good. Let's do an e-auction. We can do e-auctions here. But then you might actually forget. Well, yeah, but what's the internal?
That's
do I
right.
have do I have internal? Yeah, you need to put that internal filter on as well, as you say, and say, okay, well, actually, the category manager in this category, he's it's not going to like this, or tried it before and it was not a success, and then you need to think about how you do that whole people side of things, right? So I think it's absolutely, you got motivation and you got skills for sure.
Now, Patrick, as we start to wind down our time, I want to put in front of you a question. And I'm going to tell you right up front that if you're interested in continuing our theme of being provocative, we absolutely welcome that. But this is a question that I ask everyone that joins me on the Sourcing Hero. And you have two different options. One is, how would you define the idea of a sourcing hero? And the other option is, how would you define or recognize heroism in a business context? Which of those would you like to answer, and what would you say?
That's a good question. I think let's go for for this heroism part. I think let's do that one. So looking at being a hero in a business, I think that it's about attitude. Tying into skills and motivation. I think the real heroes, they might not be the absolute best at what they do necessarily. They can be, but they're really good at motivating and getting the team going and getting people going towards a common target. I think
Mm.
that's how I see a real hero, that actually acts as cohesiveness, as a glue. That's how I would define a real hero in a business, I think.
And that is a deceptively difficult thing to do. To get people to be cohesive is sounds like, well, yeah, of course, we want everybody pulling in the same direction. Yes, well, have you met everybody? That is not an easy thing to facilitate. So I think that's a great answer. Now, Patrick, if people that have listened in today have enjoyed your ideas and perspective, truthfully, as much as I have, what would you recommend in terms of the best way for people to reach out and connect with you or get in touch?
you can reach me, the classic LinkedIn. You can go to my website, DigiProCure.ai, or contact me that way, or over LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm happy to have a conversation. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being here with me today.
And thanks a million to you also, Kelly. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.